Have you ever thought that your silence might be louder than anything you've ever said? That the quiet absence you're holding isn't emptiness. It's a reflection of strength. Most people assume silence means weakness. They'll tell you that if someone cared, they'd speak up. They'll feed you lines like, if you mattered, they'd fight for you, and true love always finds a way. Sounds comforting, right? But what if those beliefs are exactly what's keeping you trapped in emotional chaos? Let's break that narrative wide open. See, there's a popular lie floating around out there that being silent means you've lost. That silence equals defeat. That if you're not making noise, if you're not explaining, proving, chasing, then you're giving up. But here's the truth that most won't admit. Silence is discipline, and in that discipline lives your power. Every day you don't text, every moment you resist the urge to call, every second you don't react. It speaks, it transforms, it shifts the energy, not just around them, but within you. This isn't about playing games or pretending not to care. This is about taking your power back without ever having to raise your voice. If you've ever been the one who gave more, tried harder, loved deeper, then you know what it means to lose yourself in someone else's comfort. You've been the sun in their sky, the gravity holding everything together. But now you've gone quiet, and whether they admit it or not, they feel it deeply. So, here's the real question. What does your silence say? And more importantly, what is it doing to them? That's what we're diving into today. We'll unpack the hidden impact of absence, the way silence unsettles those who once took you for granted, and how your quiet strength can create a shift more powerful than any confrontation ever could. This isn't about revenge. It's not even about them. It's about you. Choosing clarity over chaos, growth over reaction, and peace over performance. And I promise you this, by the end of this journey, you won't just understand the power of silence. You'll feel it. You'll know how to wield it. You'll understand why every Stoic relationship is built not on noise, but on calm self-possession. Because in Stoicism, silence is not surrender. It's mastery. Stay with me. Because in the next part, we begin where they least expect it. To hurt, the night. When the world goes quiet and their mind starts screaming, what happens then will change everything. 1. The night they feel the truth. It always starts when the noise fades. Not when the world is watching, not when the lights are bright and the notifications are flooding in, but in that moment when the sun dips and silence stretches across their room like a truth they can't avoid. That's when they feel you most, not in the crowded places or in the middle of their daily distractions, but in the stillness, when everything else loses meaning and their thoughts begin to echo. They told themselves they moved on. They told their friends you were just a phase, a chapter, a lesson. But the night doesn't lie. The night strips away pretense. It silences their performance and it demands authenticity. And in that darkness, in the hush between their breaths, your absence becomes a presence. Have you ever been haunted by someone still alive? That's what you've become. A voice that no longer speaks, but still lingers in their mind. A presence that doesn't knock, but still enters. During the day, they're experts at distraction. They'll scroll, swipe, laugh, perform. They'll make plans, not because they want to, but because they fear the alternative, being alone with the thoughts of you. Because when you were around, you were the calm, the one who anchored their storms without asking for recognition. You weren't just there. You were steady, consistent, a light they forgot to thank. And now, when everything slows down and the digital masks come off, they feel the shift. Not just the missing text, not just the lack of your voice, but the emotional vacuum left behind. And it hurts more than they'll ever admit. Do you know what makes the silence hit hardest? It's not just the absence of noise. It's the absence of meaning. Because when they hear nothing, they're forced to listen to everything they ignored before. all the ways they dismissed your care, minimized your effort, overlooked your value. Now they're left with memories they pretended didn't matter, conversations they swore they'd forgotten, words you spoke that suddenly replay with unbearable clarity. This is the irony. They only hear you now because you're gone. When you were speaking, showing up, trying, they turned down the volume. Now that you've withdrawn, every silent second screams. They check their phone, not expecting a message, but hoping for a mistake. That maybe you liked something. Maybe you watched their story. Maybe you slipped up and gave them one last thread to hold on to, but there's nothing. Not because you're trying to punish them, but because you finally realized you don't owe them more of yourself. And that truth is what shakes them. Your silence is not cold, it's disciplined, it's not indifference, it's intention. And in Stoic relationships, that silence is sacred. It's the choice to choose peace over chaos, clarity over confusion. When you stop reaching out, it's not because you stopped feeling, it's because you started healing. They never saw you as the strong one because your strength was quiet. Your strength was in your consistency, in your patience, in your ability to stay even when it hurt. And now that you're gone, they confuse your stillness for cruelty, but you know better. Stoicism teaches us that true power is found not in reaction, but in restraint. And right now, in the stillness of their night, your restraint is louder than any apology they could fake. Every moment they spend wondering if you'll return is a moment of reckoning with what they lost. They try to distract themselves, music, friends, late-night scrolling, but none of it fills the void. Because it's not about missing you in the obvious ways. It's not about wanting your words. It's about craving the peace your presence brought, the peace they never learned to provide for themselves. And now they sit with their guilt. They remember the way you waited for them to understand, the way you tried to speak their emotional language when they refused to learn yours. They remember how you always replied, always cared, always showed up. And they know they didn't deserve it, not fully, not then, but they thought you'd always be there. That's the lie they told themselves. That someone like you, a giver, a healer, a constant, would never really leave. So they pushed the boundary again and again, assuming you'd bend. But you didn't. You vanished, not with a bang, not with a grand exit, just with stillness. And that stillness hurts them now more than any goodbye ever could. They miss the comfort, but more than that, they miss the version of themselves that existed when you were around, because you made them feel seen, you made them feel safe. And now without you, they're left to sit in the chaos they once asked you to calm. They scroll through old messages, not to reminisce, but to decode. Was there a sign? Did you warn them? Were you already pulling away while they were busy ignoring you? Every line feels like a warning they missed. Every photo, a moment they didn't appreciate. But it's too late now. You've gone quiet, and that quiet is transformative, because you're not just absent, you've evolved. You've turned your pain into wisdom, your waiting into walking away. You've become the calm they never expected to lose. And they're beginning to realize something terrifying. They don't know how to find that calm again. Because it wasn't a place, it wasn't a practice, it was you. And now, in this night, with the weight of silence pressing against their chest, they feel what they never acknowledged, how much they needed your steadiness, not your words, not your reassurance, but your essence, your way of existing that made everything feel just a little less chaotic. That's the tragedy of taking someone for granted. They only realize the value when the light goes out. And now they're flicking the switch over and over, hoping you'll turn back on. But the current is gone, and with it, the version of you who waited, hoped, tried. You've stepped into your stoic season. You've chosen the harder path of detachment, not because you stopped loving, but because you started respecting yourself more than the pattern. And in doing so, you've become unreadable to them. That unreadability, that mystery, is the part they fear most, because humans crave certainty. We want to know we can get back what we lost, that we can control the outcome. But they can't. Rid you now. You've become the unknown. You've become the question their ego can't answer. And the silence you now hold, it's the proof that you've outgrown the dynamic. You've outgrown the dance. They don't see it yet, but they will. Every silent night chips away at their denial. Every day you don't return builds the truth. In their chest, you're not waiting anymore. You're not hurting in the way they assumed. You're healing, quietly, powerfully, completely. And as they toss and turn, trying to scroll away the ache, they'll come to see what Stoicism has always taught. That peace isn't found in the presence of others, but in the mastery of oneself. You've mastered the art of letting go without hating. You've mastered the silence that restores, not punishes. And while they try to pretend your absence is nothing, every night proves otherwise. Because night doesn't care about appearances. It doesn't care about pride. It only reflects truth. And tonight, the truth is this: every silent day without you hurts them more than they know. 2. The first silent day shifts everything. It never starts with a storm, it starts with a pause. A moment so subtle they don't even notice it at first. The day you don't text, the hour you don't reply, the silence that stretches longer than usual. To them, it's just space, just a delay. They assume you're thinking, that you'll come around, that it's just another cycle. But this time is different. This time the silence isn't waiting, it's a decision, a declaration, and slowly they begin to feel the shift. At first, they brush it off. They're just busy, they tell themselves. They're probably just tired. But then the second day comes, and the third. And now, that silence they once dismissed is no longer background noise. It's the loudest thing in their life. They scroll through your thread, rereading your last words, scanning for signs. They think maybe they missed something. Maybe there was a clue. Because something's changed. And it's not just the absence of conversation, it's the absence of energy, the absence of presence. They don't realize it immediately. But your silence has created a void. A quiet so still, so consistent. It demands to be noticed. And as each hour passes, their comfort begins to erode. They expected a reaction. They were prepared for a breakdown, maybe a passive-aggressive post, a late-night message, an impulsive call. But none of it came. Instead, what they got was space, empty, undeniable space. And that space is where the reckoning begins. They were ready for drama, not discipline. They thought you'd come chasing like you always did, that you'd explain again, that you'd try harder, but silence, that wasn't in their script. And now that script is falling apart. Every moment without your voice becomes heavier. Every missed notification becomes a symbol of what they've lost. But they won't show it. They'll post louder, laugh harder, play their role like everything is normal, but it's not. And you know it. You feel it. Stoicism teaches us to observe, not absorb, to stay steady when others waver. And right now, you're living that principle. You've chosen not to react. You've chosen not to beg for clarity. Instead, you've created space for truth to surface. And truth, once it starts rising, doesn't stop. They're beginning to realize that you're no longer part of the narrative they control. You've stepped out of the loop. And that terrifies them because the first silent day isn't just a quiet one, it's a turning point. It's the day the pattern breaks. The day they notice they're no longer sure of your place in their life. You've been the train that always arrived, on time, consistent, reliable, but today the station is empty. And that stillness isn't peaceful, it's alarming. They look at their phone, wondering if they missed something, a signal, a reason. They replay old conversations in their head, trying to convince themselves this is temporary, that you're just having a moment. But a deeper part of them knows this is different. You're not reacting anymore, you're reclaiming. You've stopped explaining, stopped justifying, stopped filling in the silence with effort. And in that absence, you've become something they can't categorize, something they can't decode. You've gone from predictable to powerful, and that shift, it's irreversible. Because what they never understood was that your consistency wasn't weakness, it was choice. And now that you've made a new one, they don't know how to respond. They expected to be the center, they expected you to orbit. But when you remove your gravity, everything floats, everything drifts, everything feels uncertain. And suddenly, the silence becomes a mirror. Not for you, for them. And in that mirror, they see what they couldn't face when you were still speaking. They see their indifference, their neglect, the way they overlooked your effort, the way they dismissed your presence. And it hurts, not because they suddenly love you more, but because they realize how much they took you for granted. This is what Stoic relationships teach us, to find strength in restraint and truth in the absence of performance. You haven't disappeared. You've disengaged. You've chosen not to be reactive, not to be emotional bait. And that decision has power, real power, because silence isn't passive, it's pressure, it's awareness, and now it's all on them. They thought they had time. They thought they could take you for granted without consequence. But the first silent day proves otherwise. It shifts the balance. It reframes the story. You're no longer the one waiting to be chosen. You've already chosen yourself. And that clarity, it rattles them. They sit with questions they never imagined asking. What if they're really done? What if I push too far? What if this silence isn't temporary? These aren't just doubts, they're tremors, cracks in the foundation of their confidence. And each day you stay silent, the shift deepens. It's not about punishing, it's about protecting. It's about no longer offering your energy to a space that couldn't hold it. And now they feel that emptiness, that absence, that missing light. They flip the script all they want, but nothing changes the truth. They had something real and they didn't cherish it. They thought your silence would scream for attention, but it didn't. It became peace. And that peace, it's louder than any fight, any plea, any explanation. They feel your absence not just in their inbox, but in their spirit. Because you weren't just noise, you were meaning. And now, all they have is the echo of their own missteps. So hold the silence, stay steady, let the shift unfold. Because this isn't just about them learning their lesson, it's about you learning your worth. You didn't walk away to hurt them, you walked away to heal. And in that healing, you've become untouchable. If this resonates with you, if you've felt the power of silence shift your entire perspective, like this video and comment number 1 to let me know you're feeling this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started and what's coming next will hit even deeper. 3. The mask begins to slip. It's fascinating how well people can pretend when the world is watching. They dress it up with smiles, laughter, curated photos, and carefully timed stories. Each post a performance, each gesture a script. On the surface, they look unbothered, thriving even. New clothes, new places, louder conversations, flashier moments. They show up like they've moved on, like your absence is a non-event, an invisible blip on their radar. But the mask, it always begins to slip. Slowly, subtly, but inevitably. Because pretending is a short-term strategy. It demands energy, attention, constant effort. And when that effort starts to crack, the truth begins to leak out. Not through dramatic breakdowns, but through micro moments. The way their eyes linger on a memory, the sudden quiet in a loud room, the hesitation when someone asks about you. You see, people can fake confidence, but they can't fake peace. Not real peace. That kind of peace doesn't post. It doesn't perform. It doesn't chase validation. And what you had, what you gave, was the kind of grounding they never appreciated until it was gone. At first, they may have even believed their own performance. They told themselves they were better off, freer, lighter. They convinced their circle you were the dramatic one, the emotional one, the one who asked for too much. But that story, it's already falling apart. Because Stoic relationships are not built on noise, they're built on presence. Your kind of presence, steady, reliable, authentic, the kind that doesn't need constant updates to feel real. And now, without that grounding force, they're spinning. Outwardly, everything looks fine, but inwardly, the pressure is rising. Think of it like a balloon blown too tight. On the surface, it's smooth, full, even graceful, but the tension is unbearable. Every day you don't return, every moment you stay silent, that pressure builds. Until one day, one memory, one small trigger, and everything bursts. They thought they were strong enough to carry the absence. They thought if they just replaced you fast enough, if they filled the gap with noise and novelty, they could erase the impact. But some people aren't erasable. And you were that person. You weren't just a name in their inbox. You were their calm in the chaos, the voice they didn't know they needed until it went quiet. Now the silence is not just inconvenient, it's haunting. Because you're not chasing anymore, you're not even watching, and that's when the panic sets in. It's not just about losing you, it's about losing the version of themselves that existed with you. The more they pretend, the more the mask constricts. Because now the act is for themselves, not just the crowd. They're trying to convince their own heart that this doesn't hurt, but it does. It hurts in the quiet, in the gaps between laughs, in the stillness after a party. That's when the mask slips. When the weight of your absence can't be held back by surface-level distractions. They start to feel the cracks in their own narrative. They remember how you used to care without needing a reason. How you stayed even when things got heavy. How you didn't need attention to offer affection. And now, in your absence, those qualities scream louder than any status update. They begin to see what you were, the foundation, not the facade. And when that realization sets in, the shame follows close behind. Not shame for what happened, but shame for how blind they were to your value. They'll still try to keep up the act. Maybe they'll double down on their public image. Maybe they'll seek validation from others to prove they've moved on. But the truth is crawling up their spine, and no amount of pretending can push it down for long. They're not mourning your messages. They're mourning what they didn't see when you were right in front of them, because now every new connection feels thinner, more forced, less real. You didn't just listen, you understood. You didn't just show up, you stayed. You were patient when they were impulsive. You were deep when they stayed shallow. And that contrast, it's impossible to unfeel. They may act like they're flourishing, but flourishing doesn't need an audience. Real growth is quiet, steady, invisible to those who only watch the highlights. And that's the irony. You've stopped performing. You've stopped pretending. You've embraced stillness, solitude, stoicism. You've grown past the need to be seen to feel worthy. And that, more than anything, is what scares them. Because people expect you to fall apart. They expect your silence to be temporary, performative. But when they realize it's genuine, that you're not hurting out loud, you're healing in peace, that's when the mask truly breaks. They thought you'd be waiting, that eventually you'd come back, but you haven't. And now, they don't know how to find you. Not emotionally, not mentally, not spiritually. You've shifted into a new space, a higher version of yourself that no longer revolves around their validation. And while they try to maintain their image, your silence grows louder. It speaks of self-respect. It whispers of boundaries. It shouts of transformation. They scroll through your feed, looking for cracks, trying to decode your new energy, wondering if you're as calm as you seem. And the answer terrifies them, because yes, you are. You're no longer explaining yourself, no longer trying to be understood by someone who chose not to listen when you were open. You've stepped into a season of sovereignty. And their mask, it can't follow you there. It's too heavy, too fragile, too fake. They didn't realize what they were performing for until the spotlight faded. And now, without your eyes to validate them, they're just actors on an empty stage. They didn't expect the silence to hold. They thought it was a pause. But it's not. It's a boundary. And that boundary, it's built on Stoicism, on choosing peace over pattern, clarity over chaos. You've stopped trying to teach people how to treat you. You've started showing them what happens when they don't. And now they're living with that lesson. Every time they see your name, they flinch. Not because of bitterness, but because of regret. Regret that they didn't take off their own mask when it mattered. Regret that they didn't match your depth, your presence, your peace. Now the performance is just for them. They're playing a role in a story you've already left, and without you, the plot feels hollow. So let the mask slip. Let the silence speak. You're not missing out. You're moving on. And in that stillness, in that quiet power, you're becoming untouchable. You're not the one performing anymore. You're not the one pretending. You're not the one hoping. You're the one evolving. Stoicism isn't about detachment. It's about direction. You've found yours. And they're still stuck on the stage, waiting for applause that won't come. Because the audience left when you did. And now all they hear is the echo of what they lost. 4. Reflection replaces reactions. The human mind is a strange and unpredictable space, especially when silence is involved. Most people underestimate what begins to unfold when all the noise disappears. At first, it feels manageable. They convince themselves they're fine, that they're in control, that your absence isn't affecting them. But as the hours stretch and distractions lose their charm, silence begins to do its work. It doesn't yell, doesn't confront, it simply lingers, and in its presence, something deeper begins to surface. Reflection. No more reactions, no more instant replies, knee-jerk defenses, or attention-grabbing behaviors. Just thought, just awareness, just the truth, unfiltered. Because that's the nature of real stillness. It strips away the performances and forces a mirror into your hands. And this time, that mirror is pointed at them. They begin replaying old conversations, not because they miss the attention, but because they're trying to understand what went wrong. Not the version they told others, not the version that made them feel justified, but the real one, the raw one. The one where you gave more than they saw, stayed longer than you should, have tried harder than anyone ever has. And in that quiet, those moments become vivid. Moments they brushed off, words they laughed at, vulnerability they ignored. At the time, it felt like you were overreacting, being too sensitive, too intense. But now, without your voice constantly reaching out, they finally have room to hear their own. And it isn't kind. It questions them, it reminds them, it accuses them, not out of cruelty, but out of consequence. Because silence is not passive, it's pressure. And under that pressure, truth surfaces. Stoicism reminds us that most pain isn't in the event, it's in our response. And now that you're no longer reacting, their story begins to collapse. It's no longer about what you did or didn't do, it's about what they refused to face when they had the chance. You were the calm, the clarity, the constant, and they mistook that for convenience. They thought your availability meant they had time, that your compassion meant they had control, but now all they have is space. And that space becomes a vault of memories, questions, regrets. They wonder if you meant more by your goodbye than you let on. They wonder if you ever really meant to come back. They wonder why they didn't take you seriously until it was too late. And every answer leads to another question. Not where did it go wrong, but when did they stop listening? When did they start assuming your forgiveness was guaranteed? When did they begin to believe that someone like you would never walk away? This is the cruel irony of underestimating someone grounded in Stoic relationships. Because you never left in anger. You didn't throw a fit. You didn't make a scene, you just grew quiet. And in that quiet, you grew stronger. Now they sit alone with the echoes, replaying, reliving, re-evaluating. They revisit old messages under the pretense of deleting them, but really, they're trying to find what they missed. They scroll through your photos looking for signs, clues, comfort, and with each flick of the screen, the weight increases. Not just of losing you, but of realizing they never really saw you in the first place. Because while they were distracted by the noise of their ego, you were showing up in silence. You were the one staying calm, steady, supportive, even as they wavered. And now that steadiness is gone, and nothing feels anchored anymore. The silence has turned from distance to reflection, and that reflection is brutal. Because it doesn't lie, it doesn't flatter, it doesn't protect the ego. It reveals, it highlights every time they didn't reply with the same energy. Every moment they dismissed your emotion, every opportunity to reassure you that they let pass. And now there is no outlet for apology, no stage to reclaim their role. You're gone, not hiding, not playing, gone. And that's what hurts the most. You didn't go quiet to punish them. You went quiet to preserve yourself. And now, without your reactions, without your effort, they're left with the full weight of what they lost. They feel your absence not just emotionally, but energetically. You were the one who brought balance, the one who diffused chaos, the one who offered depth in a shallow world. And in losing you, they've lost a version of reality that made them feel grounded. That's what Stoicism teaches us, that detachment isn't about apathy, it's about wisdom. About knowing when to stop watering a garden that only blooms, when it's convenient for someone else. And you stopped, not out of spite, but out of clarity. You've stopped reacting. And in doing so, you've forced them into a confrontation they never expected to face. Themselves, no one to blame, no one to distract them, just truth and reflection. And now it hurts. Because the memory of you isn't fading, it's sharpening. They remember not just what you said, but how it felt when you said it. They remember the tone, the timing, the sincerity. They remember how consistent you were, even when they weren't. And they realize far too late that you weren't just someone who cared. You were someone who stayed, even when they made it hard. And now that version of you is gone, replaced by silence, by stillness, by a new self who no longer seeks validation through reaction. And that change, it terrifies them. Because now, you're a question they can't answer. A presence they can't decode, a thought they can't silence. And in the stillness of their mind, every missed opportunity plays back like a film reel. Only this time, they're not the star. You are. The one who gave, the one who tried, the one who deserved better. They see it now. Every Stoic relationship carries this potential, this power of quiet reckoning. And now that the noise is gone, the reckoning is loud. You've stopped responding, and in doing so, you've started revealing who they really were, who you really are, and what this connection really meant. So let them reflect, let them feel. Let them stare into the mirror of their own silence, because while they're lost in memories, you've found your direction, and that direction, it's forward. If this chapter hit you deep, like this video, drop a number 1 in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're only getting deeper from here, and the next shift will change everything they thought they knew. 5. Your growth becomes visible. They never expected silence to look like this, to feel like this. When they pictured you going quiet, they imagined despair. They thought you'd be sulking in some corner of your heart, waiting, aching, hoping they'd finally understand. They assumed you'd be checking your phone like they do now, replaying every word, wondering what you could have done differently. But they were wrong. What they didn't count on, what they never even considered, was that your silence wouldn't come from sorrow but from strength. That instead of crumbling, you'd be rising. And not in noise, not in spectacle, but in the most terrifying way possible. Quietly, gradually, steadily. At first, they don't notice. They're too busy performing, too busy pretending not to care. But growth, real growth, has a strange rhythm. It starts beneath the surface. It begins in the still moments, in the absence of validation, in the space where old wounds used to live. And in that space, something powerful happens. You begin to reclaim yourself, not through revenge, not through making a point, but through peace. You're not posting to prove you're okay. You're not sharing every step of your healing for applause. You're simply becoming, and that stillness, that refusal to perform, that's what breaks them. Because suddenly they can't read you. You used to be predictable. They knew your cycles. They knew how to trigger a response, how to reignite the flame, how to pull you back in. But now, none of that works. You've disconnected from the script. You're no longer playing the role they cast you in. You've stepped off their stage, and you're building something new. And though they'll never admit it, they're watching. Maybe not publicly. Maybe not with likes or comments or direct messages, but they're paying attention. They notice the calm in your expression, the steadiness in your tone, the focus. In your eyes, you're not trying to make them regret. You're just not trying at all. You're living, growing, choosing. And that choice, repeated day after day in silence, becomes undeniable. Stoicism reminds us that the strongest transformations are the ones done without announcement. You're not here to explain who you're becoming. You're here to be it. You're no longer needing closure from someone who never offered clarity. You're no longer addicted to the emotional chaos that kept you locked in. You've stepped back and looked at the bigger picture, and now you see it clearly. The patterns, the manipulation, the moments you begged for crumbs of affection when you were offering the whole meal. You see it all now, and instead of reacting, you're realigning. You're investing in your peace, in your purpose, in your potential, and the version of you that's emerging. They don't recognize it because this version doesn't fold, doesn't chase, doesn't ask for understanding. This version understands itself, and that self-understanding is what unsettles them. They thought they broke you, that their silence would be louder than yours, that you'd return eventually with the same softness, the same hope. But you didn't. You haven't. You won't, because you've discovered something more valuable than reconciliation. You've discovered self-respect, and that respect is what fuels you now. You've started saying no without guilt. You've started prioritizing your boundaries over their feelings. You've started showing up for yourself in ways you once begged others to do. And the ripple effect of that, it reaches them, not because you intended it, but because growth is uncontainable. It spills, it glows, it radiates, and they feel it. Every photo that doesn't scream for attention, every message you don't send, every moment you spend in silence, it all speaks. It tells the story of someone who used to pour endlessly into a bottomless well and who finally walked away. Your silence is no longer just a void. It's a statement, a presence, an energy. You've stopped proving, stopped explaining, stopped asking them to meet you where you've already outgrown. And that, more than anything, is what shakes them, because now they're realizing you were never dependent, you were devoted. You weren't weak, you were patient, and now that your patience has expired, they're left with the consequences. They thought time would make you desperate, that eventually you'd miss them enough to come back. But the truth? Every day. Without them, you become more you. You're not just surviving, you're thriving. You're leveling up in the shadows. And while they keep dancing in circles, trying to replicate what you gave, you're walking in straight lines toward a version of yourself you've never met, but always deserved. This is what Stoicism cultivates, the ability to endure the storm without losing your center, the ability to choose stillness over spectacle. And while they spin in confusion trying to figure out what went wrong, you're not explaining, you're expanding. And that expansion is your revenge. Not through spite, not through payback, but through transformation. Because the most powerful thing you can do to someone who underestimated you is become someone they never expected, someone they can't reach, can't understand, can't manipulate. You're no longer seeking their attention. You're commanding respect through your absence, through your boundaries, through your silence. And though they won't say it out loud, they feel it in the quiet between distractions, in the moments they reach for their phone and stop themselves, in the way your name lingers longer than they'd like to admit. You've become the one that got away, not because you disappeared, but because you evolved. And evolution, real evolution, has no reverse gear. You're not waiting for them to catch up. You're not looking back. You're not measuring your worth by their recognition. You're becoming more than they ever thought you could be, because they only saw you through the lens of who they needed you to be. And now that you're free of that lens, your light is blinding, so let it shine. Let them watch. Let your silence say what your words never could. That you don't need noise to make an impact. That you don't need closure to heal. That you don't need their permission to move forward, because you already have. And this journey, it's just beginning. You've only scratched the surface of what's possible when you stop reacting and start reflecting, when you stop chasing and start becoming, when you stop waiting and start walking. And the path ahead? It's yours now. They no longer have access. Not to your heart, not to your peace, not to your growth. And that is the real shift, the one they didn't see coming, the one they can't undo, the one that proves once and for all that the most powerful transformation doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real. 6. They feel the shift and lose control. At first, it was subtle, almost imperceptible. The shift in your energy, the silence in your presence, the lack of reaction that once would have ignited 1,000 messages. They told themselves it was temporary, that you were just processing, that eventually, like always, you'd return, because they believed they still had access. They thought they knew your heart well enough to predict your next move, but the shift didn't stop. It deepened. Slowly, your silence stopped being distance and became direction, a path they couldn't follow, not because they weren't invited, but because they were never ready to walk beside you. And that shift, it terrified them, because it wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it wasn't revenge. It was peace, pure, steady, untouchable peace. And peace, real peace, is something they don't know how to handle. They expected chaos. They anticipated a storm. They were ready for confrontation, for explanation, for the drama of one last goodbye. But instead, they got stillness. They got calm. They got the realization that your silence was not about them. It was about you, about reclaiming your story, about stepping out of the narrative they kept rewriting to fit their comfort. At first, they tried to ignore it. They thought if they just acted indifferent long enough, they could outlast your silence, that you'd cave, that you'd return to the familiar script, but you didn't. You let the silence grow roots. You let it become your new normal. And now, they're the ones lost in the noise of their thoughts, because that shift isn't just emotional, it's spiritual, it's energetic, it's unexplainable. They can feel that they don't know you anymore. Not this version of you. Not the one who no longer needs their attention to feel validated. Not the one who doesn't check their profile or chase closure. Not the one who found power in walking away, not from love, but from inconsistency. Now they feel the panic. They start to realize they don't know how to reach you anymore. And not just physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You've become unreadable, mysterious, unavailable in the deepest way, and the loss of that access is what unravels them. They didn't notice the shift when it began because they weren't looking. They were too busy assuming they'd always have you, that your heart, so loyal and forgiving, would never truly detach. But you did, quietly, permanently. And now they're faced with the consequences of their own arrogance. They dance through the same rooms, but the rhythm has changed. You used to move with them, respond on cue, fall back into place. But now they're dancing alone, reaching for a presence that no longer responds. And that shift, it's no longer subtle, it's seismic. They feel it in their gut, in the space where your words used to land, in the places where they thought they had control. Because Stoic relationships don't end in explosion, they end in evolution. And your evolution is what broke the pattern. You stopped giving unlimited chances. You stopped translating your worth for someone unwilling to learn. Your language. You stopped begging to be understood by someone who only heard what they wanted. And that stop, that shift, is permanent. Now they see glimpses of you, not in your words, but in your silence, not in your presence, but in your glow. You've stopped posting for validation. You've stopped performing for approval. And that energy, it's undeniable, it's unmissable, it's unstoppable, and that terrifies them. Because now they're not just missing your voice, they're haunted by your growth. They didn't expect you to thrive in silence. They thought silence would break you. But instead, it built you. Now they're watching, even if it's from the shadows, even if it's through fake accounts or second-hand stories. They're watching, not to support you, not to celebrate you, but because they need to understand how someone they thought they had figured out became someone they can't even reach. And what they're starting to understand is that they didn't lose the old you, they lost the chance to grow with you. They didn't just lose your affection, they lost access to your peace. And access, once revoked, doesn't come back easily, especially not with someone who's embraced Stoicism, because Stoicism doesn't beg, it doesn't perform, it doesn't explain, it becomes. And you've become someone they never imagined you could be, because they never saw past the version of you they controlled. And now that illusion is shattered. You don't wait, you don't chase, you don't break, you rise, and they unravel, slowly, quietly, inevitably, because people don't lose control all at once. They lose it moment by moment, missed call by missed call, unanswered message by unread post, thought by thought, until one day they realize they no longer know how to feel about you, because everything they once believed was a lie built on ego. They said you were too emotional. Now they miss your empathy. They said you were too available. Now they miss your presence. They said you were too much. Now they feel empty. That's the power of the shift, not in what it takes from them, but in what it returns to you. Self-respect, confidence, direction. You didn't walk away for revenge. You walked away because you couldn't shrink yourself anymore. And now, they sit in the space where you used to show up and feel the weight of their own absence, not yours, theirs, because you never really left. You just stopped explaining your worth to someone who didn't value it. And when you did, everything changed. You became the mystery they can't solve, the peace they can't replicate, the silence they can't ignore. And that silence, it's louder than any explanation. It's more powerful than any goodbye. It's the proof that your growth didn't need permission. It just needed release. So if this message struck a chord, like this video, comment number 1 if you're feeling this shift too, and subscribe, because there's more coming. This story isn't just about the end. It's about what begins now. And now, here you are. After the silence, after the shift, after the unraveling, not broken, not bitter, but clear, strong, steady. What began as a quiet withdrawal has become a powerful transformation. You didn't disappear, you returned to yourself. You peeled away every layer of performance, of pretending, of proving, and found something deeper, something unshakable. What they felt as absence was your re-entry into authenticity. You no longer explain your worth because it's felt. You no longer seek peace in others because it lives in you. You've walked the path of silence not as an escape, but as a rite of passage, one that refined your values, your vision, your voice. And as Stoicism teaches, the most powerful force isn't the one that screams, it's the one that endures with grace and dignity. Your stillness is not emptiness. its clarity, its strength. And for those who once underestimated you, that clarity is confronting. Because they're not grieving a person, they're grieving the power you reclaimed, the power they never believed you'd find, the peace they thought you'd never choose. So hold that peace now, not as armor, but as truth. Let it carry you, define you, expand you. You didn't walk away to be missed, you walked away to become. And in that becoming, you've proven the quietest voice often leaves the deepest echo. Stay steady, stay silent, stay powerful, because your journey is no longer tied to the past. It's rising towards something greater, something unshakable, something free.